Hello, my name is Elizabeth Woodworth, and I'm the co-founder of the International 9/11 Consensus Panel, which was invited to give evidence at the World Social Forum in Montreal last month. The World Social Forum was one of the largest conferences ever held in Montreal. It was held at McGill, Concordia, and the University of Quebec. 170 sessions ran concurrently for 3 solid days. I presented an evidence-based session on 9/11 along with professors from New York City, Copenhagen, and Ontario. But I did not see any mainstream media from any country while I was there. Today I am joined by my colleague, Brian Burchill. Brian is a mechanical engineer and has written about the 9/11 Consensus Panel. Brian has also been interviewed about the strange collapses of the Twin Towers and World Trade Center 7. But first we are going to talk about the astonishing lack of media coverage for the enormous World Social Forum.
The World Social Forum opposes large multinational corporations having unregulated political power exercised through trade agreements and deregulated financial markets. It opposes corporations maximizing profit at the expense of work safety conditions and standards, low payment of labor, and poor environmental principles, and the undermining of national legislative authority, independence, and sovereignty. 100 of the world's largest corporations fund the World Economic Forum and set its agenda. They invite the world political elite to hold off-the-record policy discussions of the agenda items. It would appear that media corporations who attend the World Economic Forum were not interested in reporting the strong opposition from international civil society and virtually blacked it out. It was covered twice by the Montreal Gazette and once by Huffington Post. Also, the World Social Forum covered evidence such as 9/11 that is chronically blacked out in the mainstream media in any case.
Brian and I are here to offer scientific evidence about 9/11. We will explain how the consensus panel reaches consensus on evidence refuting the official story and why that evidence is trustworthy. We will also show video footage of psychologists who explain why, even if the plain truth is shown to people, how the mechanism of denial kicks in for them. At the World Social Forum at McGill University, 2 professors and myself gave a presentation. The presentation was called "Why We Need to Uncover the 9/11 Deception." It contained evidence refuting the events of 9/11.
Some of this evidence you may never have heard before because it has not been part of public debate about 9/11. First, though, we would like to quickly show you the credibility of the 9/11 Consensus Panel. This is an international panel of 23 researchers. It was founded in 2011. The panel is made up of reviewing and honorary members. Its reviewing members offer a wide spectrum of expertise, as you will see in a moment.
The 7 academic members bring different perspectives to the evidence. 2 of them, Dr. Harrett on the left and Dr. McQueen below him, presented the session at the World Social Forum with me. And we have physicists on the panel. We have a public administrator and a medical doctor. So we're really we cover the landscape pretty well. There are 3 engineering specialties and 2 good lawyers. One of them is from the Berkeley School of Law, and 2 career pilots. Notably, David Gapp was an aircraft accident investigator, which is essential in looking into the plane crashes. These 3 journalists have spent years researching and publishing 9/11 evidence. Mr. Mazzucco, an award-winning Italian filmmaker, released his latest film, which is 42 minutes long, just this past September 9th, 2016. It is called September the 11th, The New Pearl Harbor, a summary of his 5-hour historical film by the same name. His summary is on YouTube, and we highly recommend viewing it for a compressed set of really credible evidence. He's on the consensus panel, and everything he says in his video is very close to the work we do. Francis Schur, a psychologist, will be part of the team explaining the psychological resistance to 9/11 evidence that will be seen in the video coming up in a few minutes.
Now we will talk about the consensus points that the panel has developed. The 48 points are divided into these 10 categories. For example, the Pentagon. The Pentagon is one of the most secure buildings on the planet. There are security cameras mounted on the building and around the building. So cameras are focused on the building itself, and the cameras that are mounted on the building focus outward from the building. There's dozens of these cameras were running on that day, and all of the cameras, the footage from the cameras, was confiscated. The FBI went around the Pentagon and confiscated all the footage from the cameras outside. And so there's lots of photographic evidence, but as we'll see, all this evidence that could be there, the question is, why are we not seeing it? Because this evidence is of international importance, the panel's volunteer translators have translated hundreds of pages of evidence.
Dr. David Ray Griffin and I founded the consensus panel in 2011, which is 5 years ago now. For background, I worked in the BC Ministry of Health for many years. My training was to research evidence-based health information for the province's health officers and other public health nurses, public health dentists, all the health units around the province. And I have now applied this training to provide evidence-based research about 9/11. Dr. Griffin is well known internationally for his original philosophical work. He is noted for the clarity and precision of his scholarship. He is based in Santa Barbara and lectures internationally. His first 9/11 book, The New Pearl Harbor, in 2004, is on the left. It was a bestseller. It was the first academic book that had been published on this topic. The last one, and you see all the ones in the middle, and I helped him with all these books. The last one, published in 2011, 9/11 10 years later, is on the right. He has a new book coming out, new 9/11 book coming out in November of 2016.
So you used your expertise in research to help him get the best evidence for these books, is that right?
I did. I helped him. We worked together on 9/11 books for about 6 years, 6 or 7 years, about one book a year. He did 2 before I started working with him. His second book was about the government's 9/11 Commission report. This report was called a whitewash by Harper's Magazine. Griffin showed that it was a whitewash by finding 115 omissions and distortions in the report, which appeared to be covering up high crimes. These 2 books were written in 2005 and 2006. He edited the second one. That was intellectuals speaking out, so there were quite a number of people involved in that book. The quality of Griffin's work was recognized by Publishers Weekly in 2008. This company is 144 years old, and its reviews are seen by most libraries, publishers, and bookstores. Only 51 books a year get the distinction of Pick of the Week, which normally leads to many book reviews around in the English-speaking language. Here's a shot of that Publishers Weekly review, just so everybody knows it really did happen, to a book that was written about 9/11. The media completely ignored this book. As a librarian who'd been seeing Publishers Weekly in my job for 25 years, this absolutely stunned me. It would appear that there is a corporate media blackout of 9/11 evidence.
Griffin's full expose of the World Trade Center 7 building, its collapse, was published in 2009. Again, there were no book reviews. It appears that this important book was also blacked out by the corporate media. Griffin was nominated for the 2011 Nobel Peace Prize by 10 international professors and members of Parliament for his work to disclose the false flag attacks of 9/11. And I'd like to clarify what a false flag is. Many people in the public may not know that a false flag is the term for an attack when a country secretly attacks itself and then blames the attack on the country it wants to invade. That's a false flag. 9/11, which was a deception, started the global war on terror, which is a constant media priority. This focus prevents the far more serious threat of climate change from taking its rightful place in public awareness. Closure on the 9/11 false flag event is essential so that energy and resources can be redirected to addressing climate change. This is why Dr. Griffin has written 11 books on 9/11.
Dr. Griffin's work was recognized by the famous British journal, The New Statesman, which was founded in 1913. It seemed like a good thing that Griffin was named number 41 of the 41 in the world of the 50 people who matter the most, but a contradiction appeared. The actual intent of The New Statesman was to demean his work. In order to establish greater credibility, it became necessary to form the 9/11 Consensus Panel of 23 professional researchers. The purpose of the 9/11 Consensus Panel is to provide the world with a clear statement based on expert independent opinion of some of the best evidence opposing the official narrative about 9/11. The goal of the Consensus Panel is to provide a ready source of evidence-based research to any investigation that may be undertaken by the public, the media, academia, or any other investigative body or institution. Consensus is reached through a best evidence model used internationally in medicine. Similarly, it can be used to develop the best evidence about 9/11. This judge presided over the assassination of President Aldo Moro in 1978 and over the attempted assassination of Pope John Paul II. He's the most famous judge in Italy, and he was very happy to be one of the honorary members of the 9/11 Consensus Panel. There are 7 more honorary members who also support the Consensus Panel's work, including the late Honorable Michael Meacher, who died last year. He was the longest sitting member of the British House of Commons and very well liked man in England. And he was always raising the question, why hasn't there been a proper investigation into 9/11? And we just show you the panel's Twitter site, which has more than 4,000 followers, which kind of attests to the interest out there. And finally, the panel's credibility is shown by viewer interest. The website gets over 1,200 visits a day, 300,000 visits a year, and about 5 million hits. And just recently on 9/11 itself, there were about 11,000 visits that day.
On this past September 11th, 11,000 hits?
Yeah,
visits?
They're more than that actually, and they continue to be.
Yeah.
Yes. Now, the panel uses something that's used in medicine, as I mentioned, and it's called the Delphi method to arrive at the best evidence. And the Delphi method has the advantages of group decision making using anonymous controlled feedback procedures, which are often more accurate than face-to-face discussions. And opinions using the Delphi method can be received from a group of experts who can be geographically separated from one another, which is the case with our consensus panel. And the other thing is that the Delphi method stops strong personalities from taking dominance and unduly affecting certain positions in evidence development. The members of the 9/11 Consensus Panel cannot discuss the evidence during its formal reviews. Powerful personalities, as I mentioned, can't dominate the discussion, and each consensus point receives 3 rounds of review and feedback by the panel and must attain 85% consensus to be passed and published on
So-
our website.
So the fact that they're geographically separated prevents the opportunity for dominant personalities to control the conversation. They don't have a conversation with each other. Is
That's
that
right.
okay?
So it is true consensus because everybody's blind and is not afraid to say what they want to say. So
Right.
it's a good method. And this method is used in medicine. You can see consensus statements. If you Google consensus statements, they're considered to be the best evidence, one form of the best evidence that medicine develops. There are others, but the Delphi method is certainly a top one.
Okay. Now we will turn to 3 compelling points of evidence that are not usually discussed by people in the 9/11 truth community. At 5:20 p.m., this 47-story steel skyscraper collapsed even though it was not hit by a plane. This is the World Trade Center 7 I'm talking about. It's a 47-story skyscraper, wasn't hit by a plane, but it collapsed on September the 11th in the afternoon. The official cause of the collapse was office fires. But office fires do not generate enough heat to weaken steel enough to cause a collapse. There have been incidences around the world of raging fires in steel frame buildings for hours, even days, but no steel frame building has ever collapsed due to fires. A key to how the World Trade Center 7 collapsed is that it fell in 7 seconds, which would be the same amount of time as if they stood on the 47th floor and dropped a bowling ball. It would fall to the ground in about 7 seconds. That's free fall, no resistance other than air resistance, which is negligible in this case. So what happened was the fact that it fell in 7 seconds indicates that it was a free fall. Office fires cannot cause a free fall collapse. A free fall collapse requires precisely synchronized explosions that they need to go off in a very precise timing in the building to take essentially the structure below, remove it to break the connections, and in a very tightly synchronized sequence so that all the resistance or the structure of the building disappears, and so the upper floors then can fall freely. And that's why it's called free fall. And that's what happened in this building. It cannot fall freely at free fall speeds without the lower structures having been removed. And that's an important fact in this analysis of the World Trade Center 7. Now, the government's explanation is they couldn't analyze the steel because it had been taken away. Well, this photo shows that that's a lie. Here's a recent proof that the government lied by saying they didn't have the Building 7 steel. This is a photo of John Gross, who's the co-project leader of the government analysis of the structural collapse of World Trade Center 7, that structural collapse. He's standing on steel from World Trade Center 7 in a scrapyard in October of 2001, so just a matter of a few weeks after the 9/11 incident. Here he is standing on the steel of World Trade Center 7. He was later involved in the analysis, and the claim was they didn't have the steel. This is proof that that's a lie.
Now we will look at consensus point video 2. All these consensus points are on the website, all 48 of them, but we're just looking at these 3 special ones today. The official claim was that 5 hijackers boarded Flight 77, which allegedly hit the Pentagon at Dulles Airport near Washington, D.C. This video was not made public until 2004, just before the 9/11 Whitewash Commission report was published. It purports to show the hijackers from a security camera above the checkpoint. However, the best evidence shows that this is not an official security camera photo because security cameras carry a time-date stamp, use 1-second time-lapse photography to save storage space on their cameras that are posted for hour after hour, week after week. And this video has 30 frames per second, like a home video camera. So that's very significant. Also, the security screeners, the people that frisk you and everything, did not remember the men. A very interesting industry news item appeared in 2011, which shows that this is something we didn't know, that there was a full review of all 300 security cameras at Dulles Airport. And you can see from this man's testimony, Mr. Brent, that this took solid weeks to do. And if the government had found pictures of the hijackers, you'd think that they would have published them rather than publishing a frame from a video that had no time or date stamp on it. The government did not produce a single image of hijackers from its security cameras. We can deduce that it used footage from a personal video camera to claim that hijackers departed from Dulles Airport to board Flight 77, which allegedly hit the Pentagon. So that's our conclusion for this particular consensus point, that the government again was dishonest in its producing its evidence.
So this fellow David Brent was part of a team that spent 3 weeks, 15-hour days, going through all the security cameras. So if images of the hijackers were actually on those cameras, they'd have seen them. This team would have found that. And those images would have the timestamps and everything, solid proof that these hijackers went through the airport.
That's right.
And yet the official photo is off some personal camera that looks to be set up to mimic a security camera.
That's what it appears to be.
Huh.
It doesn't add up, does it? This is the third consensus point that we're going to show you today, consensus point ME3. And the government, the official claim was that the 4 massive annual military drills that were rescheduled for September the 11th, 2001. This is a really puzzling thing, because these were held normally in April or late October. And the official claim was that these drills did not interfere with the military response to the hijacked planes. But the best evidence shows, and the consensus panel divides its consensus points into government claims, sometimes an introduction, then a government claim, and then the best evidence. The best evidence is that only one drill was mentioned in the 9/11 Commission report, and that was in a footnote. In fact, 12 air drills were running the morning of 9/11, and 7 of those drills had been rescheduled from late October, an enormous departure from other years. These exercises moved fighters to Alaska and other regions of North America. They also simulated hijackings. There were 29 reports of hijacked planes that morning for the FAA to try and figure out. The situation was absolutely chaotic because of the air drills, which were not called off until about mid-morning, after the World Trade Center and the Pentagon had both been hit.
My understanding is the exercises, as you say, moved the aircraft away from the northeast sector of the United States, and I've seen a number of 4. There were 4 jet aircraft left to protect the entire northeastern United States, and that was it. The rest of them had been, for some reason, moved elsewhere on the continent.
That's exactly right, Brian.
This U.S. military newsletter dated March 23rd, 2001, is the proof that the Global Guardian war game was rescheduled. Thing is, who ordered this? This is key. To move such a massive exercise as this would take a top official to be able to order this change, this rescheduling. Key to the understanding of the 9/11 attacks, we need to know who ordered this change, this rescheduling from March to September the 11th. This needs to be investigated.
That's right, and there would be records. I mean, Global Guardian and Vigilant Guardian were enormous exercises called by the U.S. Strategic Command, and they were usually publicized to all the military people weeks and months in advance. As you see from Global Guardian, there would be records in the military showing when these exercises were actually moved, and that would come out in an investigation where people were subpoenaed to testify.
And this publication shows that it was originally scheduled, and that's the highlight that we have here, the yellow highlight shows the original scheduling, and it got moved. We will end this part of the show with a quote from Gore Vidal. This is how he described the War on Terror. A war both on an unknown enemy and an abstract noun, and therefore a war with no end and a war that cannot be won. 9/11 started this perpetual war. The world needs to pursue the questions raised by the 9/11 consensus panel. Gore Vidal's point was that with the Soviet Union superpower gone, the global war on terror provides the West with a new enemy for conducting perpetual war. Now we present a short film called 9/11 Explosive Evidence. Psychologists Speak Out. This film was made to explain why it is so difficult for people to hear the truth about 9/11. With their extensive experience in counseling working with trauma patients, these professional psychologists explain some of the reasons why.
Most of us who have lived with the events of 9/11 have, as a result, experienced some kind of trauma. It can be very difficult to come to terms with what actually happened at the World Trade Center. In fact, someone told me recently, "I wouldn't believe what you're telling me even if it were true." Our petition signers with psychological expertise have stepped forward to offer their insight. While this segment is clearly outside the knowledge base of the architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth, these experts in psychology highlight their valuable experience for us as to why this evidence can still be so difficult for people to accept.
As we know, the horrors of what happened on 9/11 were televised all over the world, and they were televised, in fact, live. We witnessed the deaths of almost 3,000 of our fellow Americans. We know this had a very severe and traumatic impact on a majority of the population. At this point, we have 9 years of hard scientific evidence that disproves the government theory about what happened on September 11th, and yet people continue to be either oblivious to the fact that this information exists or completely resistant to looking at this information. So the question becomes why? Why is it that people have so much trouble hearing this information? From my work, I think we would be remiss not to look at the impact of trauma.
Many people respond to these truths in a very deep way. Some have a visceral reaction like they've been punched in the stomach. To begin to accept the possibility that the government was involved is like opening Pandora's box. If you open the lid and peek in a little bit, it's going to challenge some of your fundamental beliefs about the world.
If we can think of our worldview as being sort of our mental and emotional home, I think all of us will do just about anything to defend our homes, to defend our families. And so I see that with people, and I saw that with myself when my brother tried to talk with me about it, of don't mess with me, don't mess with my home, don't mess with my comfort with how things are. About a week later, I read a lengthy article by Professor Griffin about why he believes the official account of 9/11 cannot be true. And it was a very well-researched article. It was in my office at the time. I sat there and I felt my stomach churning. I thought maybe I was going to be sick. And I leaped out of my chair and ran out the door and took a long walk around the block, around several blocks, and just broke down. I understand now that what was happening was my worldview about my government being in some way my protector, almost like a parent, had been dashed, and it was like being cast out into the wilderness, I think is the closest way to describe that feeling. And I sobbed, felt like the ground had completely disappeared beneath my feet. And I knew at some point during the walk that I knew that I was going to have to become active in educating other people about this, that for me to retain any sense of integrity, I was going to have to take some action. I couldn't just let something like this go.
When we hear information that contradicts our worldview, social psychologists call the resulting insecurity cognitive dissonance. For example, with 9/11, we have one cognition, which is what the official story of 9/11, what our government told us, what our media repeated to us over and over, that 19 Muslims attacked us. On the other hand, we have what scientists, researchers, architects, engineers are now beginning to tell us, which is that there is evidence that shows that the official story cannot be true. So now we've lost our sense of security. We are starting to feel vulnerable. Now we're confused.
9/11 truth challenges the beliefs that our country protects us and keeps us safe, and that America is the good guy. When your beliefs are challenged, fear and anxiety are created. In response to that, our psychological defenses kick in, and they protect us from these emotions. Denial, which is probably the most primitive psychological defense, is the one most likely to kick in when our beliefs are challenged.
And it's a very, very uncomfortable state to be in. And eventually our mind shuts off. Just like when a computer is overloaded, our minds get overloaded. We can't handle it anymore and we shut down.
And what some of us will tend to do is deny the evidence that's coming our way and stick to the original story, the official story, and to try to regain our equilibrium in that way. Another thing we can do is decide to look at the conflicting evidence and be sincere and be open-minded and look at both sides of the issue and then make up our own mind about what reality is. Here are a few of those spontaneous initial reactions to hearing the contradictory evidence about 9/11.
I don't want to know the truth, or I'd become too negative and psychologically go downhill. I'm not sure I want to know. If this is true, then up would be down and down would be up. My life would never be the same.
They say, this is the way the world works, and I'm convinced this is the right way the world works. 9/11 doesn't fit into that paradigm. So I don't need to look at the evidence.
Fran, I refuse to believe that many Americans could be that satanically treasonous. Someone would have talked. But these are beliefs. They are not scientific facts. But these beliefs do keep us from looking at the empirical evidence. Whenever we say, I refuse to believe, we can be sure that the evidence that's coming our way is not bearable and that it's conflicting with our worldview much too much. As I thought about all of these responses, I realized that what is common to every one of them is the emotion of fear. People are afraid of being ostracized, they're afraid of being alienated, they're afraid of being shunned, they're afraid of their lives being inconvenienced, they'd have to change their lives, they're afraid of being confused, they're afraid of psychological deterioration, they're afraid of feeling helpless and vulnerable. And they're afraid that they won't be able to handle the feelings that are coming up. None of us want to feel helpless and vulnerable.
Healing comes through facing the truth, experiencing it, allowing the feelings to come in, so that if there are feelings of fear that perhaps these events were caused by something that we haven't thought about yet, dark elements within our society, for example, we'll let that come in and explore it. Let the light shine on whatever happened. This will be the most healing process. The Germans did this after their war. The South Africans did this after apartheid. Reconciliation through the truth is what is a deep path to psychological recovery from the myths and lies around which this historic event has been cloaked in the official view.
One of the ways to deal with the trauma is to find the answers. That's why I think it is of such importance to have a comprehensive investigation.
To work together to expose what happened, regardless of where the evidence takes us. That's what we expect in our state government, law enforcement. I think that by putting science together with the law, we will have a psychological healing around the impossible cognition that has been produced on that day.
After World War II, part of the way that Jewish people honored the dead was by making sure that the truth was known and that the value of these people was respected. Not pursuing the truth about 9/11 disrespects the value of the life of the people that died. Thinking that we're above such things, that it could happen in other countries, but it couldn't happen here, that's a lack of humility, and that's excessive pride. And so not being able to see our dark side or our weaknesses is the most dangerous thing.
A feature of American history that makes us particularly liable to this pride is this notion that's called exceptionalism, that America is the exceptional nation. And that began from the beginning. As this country was formed, the people would say, well, there was so much evil in the European country, so much cheating, so much lying, so much using the people for the ruler's purposes, but not in America. We have leaders that are free from those sins. So I think this has made 9/11 particularly difficult for Americans.
So we need to understand that questioning is patriotic. Questioning is what we're supposed to do as citizens. That's our duty.
One thing that has become important for me personally is to educate myself, is to take responsibility. There's that wonderful quote from Mahatma Gandhi where he said that we must be the change that we wish to see in the world.
When we come to the national level, when something like 9/11 happens, we need to be sure that we have a real investigation into who the perpetrators are, and then we need to be sure that those perpetrators are held legally accountable. It's part of the healing process on the individual level as on the collective level. We need the truth in order to heal.
So the psychologists have explained to us why people have difficulty accepting the truth when the facts are facing them, and yet they still have difficulty accepting that that's the truth. Let's talk about some of the very strong evidence that supports that does not support the official version. The truths are out there that do not support the official version, and I'd like to discuss a few of them with you. One that I understand is that the official version is that the jets crashed into the buildings, and the jet fuel, we all saw it, great big fireball, and that created enough heat to soften and weaken and melt the steel and cause the collapse. The truth is that the jet fuel was just a big fireball that disappeared quickly, and that heat source was gone, and then the fire was office furniture, which does not generate enough heat to melt steel.
No.
But also, we all remember the image of these twin towers and the smoke billowing from these towers. The smoke is an indication of a oxygen-starved fire. So that would indicate that it was a cool fire in there. And is it true that the consensus panel, one of the points they dealt with was the firemen in the building up on the 78th floor, I think?
Yes, indeed, Brian. The firemen, this is one of our most recent consensus points, is that in one of the towers, I think it was the South Tower, the firemen were dragging hoses up all the way up to the 78th floor, where approximately where the plane had hit. And they said, we don't really need you to start the other household supply of fire, or the in-house fire systems because these 2 hoses are enough to put out these pockets of fire. It's really not that bad up here. And this was a transcript of that they recovered afterwards, and I think they found the transcript somewhere in Building 5 that the firemen it showed. It was direct evidence of what they were experiencing, and this has been suppressed.
That he radiated back just pockets of fire, and
That's
two
right.
hoses would handle it. That's not an indication of a raging inferno.
It certainly isn't.
And also the fact that he could stand there and observe these fires is an indicator that it's not a raging inferno. A human being couldn't stand in a raging inferno. So this is evidence that there wasn't enough heat in there to melt the steel and soften it to cause a collapse. So, but they did collapse. Something weakened the steel. So what heat source was there to cause the steel to give way? It obviously wasn't the office fires, it wasn't the jet fuel. Well, the thing is that you work with Dr. Niels Harrit, and I understand that he was the lead of a team of 9, was it, scientists that analyzed the dust of the World Trade Center 7. Sorry, the World Trade Center. They analyzed the dust, is that right?
They did. And in the dust, they found all these tiny little gray chips, gray on one side and red on the other. And they analyzed these chips, and they found out that they had the same components in them as nanothermite, which is it's an incendiary, man-made incendiary. It's not found in nature, and normally the only source of nanothermite at that time was military laboratories. So here's all this stuff that's so hot that it can cut steel very easily, and the beams and pillars were some of them were cut diagonal angle, and that's covered in Massimo Mazzucco's movie September the 11th, The New Pearl Harbor. All these fine details about how the buildings fell, things that we are not told anywhere else. Massimo has covered in his 5-hour wonderful video.
The thermate and thermite react at temperatures that melt steel. So if you put the thermate on a steel beam and then start the reaction of the thermate, its high heat will then transfer into the steel beam and melt that and therefore cut the beam.
Yes.
That is, I understand, is thermate, and thermite can be used for welding, to weld steel together, but also in the controlled demolition industry can be used to cut the beams in order to initiate a collapse. Was there evidence of molten steel? My recollection is there's video of it streaming out of the buildings. Molten metal, I should say molten metal. The presumption is that it's steel because it was the right color.
Yes.
Right?
Kind of an orange color.
Yeah.
And it was just streaming out.
Streaming out.
And that, as you say, like paper and office furniture would not be able to do that to steel. So we're assuming that because of these tiny chips throughout the dust that were analyzed, that they had something to do with that molten steel. And then there was a deep mystery of the towers, is that underneath the towers for months afterwards, they found molten steel still running through things that they were picking. They were picking with their bulldozers, picking debris deeply out of the
dripping, right?
Dripping molten
There's
steel.
video of that, right?
Yes,
yeah.
there is.
Yeah. The chips in the dust, my understanding is that when the explosion would happen the thermate melts the steel beams, and there would be explosions to do the final cut. That explosion would throw off some of the incendiary, the thermate, so there'd be some residue would fly off, and that would end up in the dust, and that's what they found in the dust.
That's what they found.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The final, this is not quite evidence, but it's very damning bit of damning evidence, I guess I'll call it. It's not proof, but the owner of the World Trade Center complex is on video saying that he and the fire chief made a decision to pull Building 7. I'm now talking back to Building 7, not the Twin Towers.
Yep.
And I've seen it myself. He said that the two of them made the decision to, quote, pull it. And that is an industry term for what?
Demolition.
Quote, controlled demolition.
Right.
So, doesn't prove, but very damning evidence.
Very damning. And imagine making a decision to pull a building during the time that the the attacks have been underway the very same day, saying we made a decision to pull it and it came down 7 hours later.
Yeah.
Well, obviously they would have had to wire that building,
Yeah.
47-story, huge steel skyscraper. They would have had to wire it months in advance.
That is a very troubling part of it, is that somebody did not wire it that day. The planning for a controlled demolition is very precise, computer controlled, and takes placing the charges at the right joints in the building, putting the cabling in to set those charges off, and that takes weeks, right?
Weeks at least.
So the question is, who had access to those buildings?
Good.
And does it seem reasonable that terrorists could have daily access to the buildings for weeks? It's not likely. Has the consensus panel looked into, is the consensus panel trying to determine who did this? Is that the work of the panel?
Oh no, that's quite outside our scope. Our goal is to provide evidence to any future investigation that might want to look into 9/11. Governments could, the International Criminal Court, for example, or any government, or any private outfit could decide to do a thorough investigation. In fact, there have been some, but we are not really qualified to say who did this. We might think we have some suspicions, but all we're really doing is providing evidence to society.
Evidence that the official version is flawed, is full of flaws, in fact defies laws of physics in some parts of the official version, showing that the official version is not correct, which hopefully will cause a groundswell of demand for an investigation to find out who did it, what actually happened and who did it. Is that right? The panel is trying
That's
to
what we want to do. We want to find out who did it, because it's standing there. The war on terror that resulted from it is in the newspapers every day, and we feel that if we can get all this unnecessary attention off 9/11, we can swivel around and put our attention on the existential problem of climate change. Why, after 15 years, is 9/11 still so important? Why should people bother trying to face this truth that we've just been telling you about?
Well, the impact of 9/11, there was a good article written by Tom Engelhardt. So it was 2015 this was written, and therefore he refers to 14 years prior. What he wrote was 14 years of wars, interventions, assassinations, torture, kidnappings, black sites, and growth of the American national security state to monumental proportions, and the spread of Islamic extremism across much of the greater Middle East and Africa. 14 years of astronomical expense, bombing campaigns galore, and a military first foreign policy of endless alarms and warnings, as well as dire predictions of terrorist attacks. 14 years of the spread of secrecy and classification of every document in sight, and fierce prosecution of whistleblowers. 14 years of our wars coming home in the form of post-traumatic stress disorder, the militarization of the police, and the spread of war zone technology like drones and stingrays to the, quote, homeland. 14 years of the expansion of surveillance of every kind and of the development of a global surveillance system whose reach would have stunned those running the totalitarian states of the 20th century. September 11 has never ended. Instead, it has grown, expanded, metastasized, and continued to subsume the world. Worse yet, the war on terror that was spawned by 9/11 has taken media priority over climate change.
The fossil fuel industry has given vast amounts of money to junk science that has denied human-caused climate change. ExxonMobil contributed a great deal of this money. The corporate media cooperated. From 1988 through to the Paris Climate Summit in 2015, the media published this junk science, appearing to give both sides of the picture. Thus, the media provided a false balance between climate science and climate science denial. As a result, civilization has wasted 25 years arguing about the climate science and has not been able to defend itself from global warming. But the corporate forces of denial have now come to light. The governors of 16 Democrat states are suing ExxonMobil for criminally misleading the media and the public. We see a thread running through all this evidence. The biggest corporations fund enormous secret meetings with governments. In a process known as regulatory capture, the governments become amenable to those whom they should be regulating. And you can see the quote that a firm that is too big to fail is in a powerful position to dictate its terms to regulators and government. Perhaps we should look more closely at the fact that 9/11 conveniently produced public consensus to create regime change in the oil-rich Middle East, and the fact that climate science denial and 9/11 have had the same effect. Both allow the heavily subsidized fossil fuel industry to continue to seek oil in the Middle East, and the media has become complicit in both with its blackouts. The deceptions of 9/11 and climate denial thus originate from the same source: power and profits from energy dominance in a world of grossly unequal wealth. Widespread recognition of the falsity of both deceptions is central to the future welfare of civilization. If our world is to recover its natural balance, the science on both 9/11 and climate change needs to rise to prominence in the minds of people of all ages. The corporate media should demand an independent investigation into the events of September the 11th, 2001.
There is a mountain of scientific evidence that refutes the official version of the events on September the 11th, 2001 in New York City. We have shown you but a fraction of that evidence.
It has been our great pleasure to present this evidence to you today, and especially on 9/11 and climate change and the link between them. And I'd like to say again that this is my colleague, Brian Burchill. My name's Elizabeth Woodworth from the 9/11 Consensus Panel, and we invite you to visit our website for a great deal more information.